Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to share 6 tips to help you make sure that when you set up literacy centers this school year, it all goes smoothly. Setting up literacy centers at the beginning of the school year is one of the hardest things. And when I'm saying literacy centers, I don't necessarily mean physical stations. It could be any type of independent work that students are doing so that you can pull small groups, right? And when we're thinking about kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students, it can be really challenging for them to work independently. It's hard for our little ones. And it's so important that we set up centers or independent work, however you set it up, at the beginning of the school year in a way that truly allows kids to work on their own so that we can focus on our small groups, because otherwise it just ends up feeling really chaotic where we can't focus on our small groups. We're popping up to help the kids that are supposed to be working independently, and it just turns into a mess that is not a good use of instructional time. So I'm going to share these tips that can help you get a great start from the beginning of the school year or reset later on if you need to. And these are going to be helpful whether you are brand new to teaching, to doing centers and independent work, or whether you've been teaching them for a long time. So before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I would love for you to do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you're notified every time I post a brand new video. Okay, so tip number 1 is to go slow now to go fast later. And what that means is take the time you and your students need now to get them comfortable and able to work independently so that when it does come time for you to start pulling your small groups, whenever you see that they're ready, you can actually focus on those small groups and not worry about what the other kids are doing. Of course, you need to supervise them, but it's very different to be able to pull your small group and know that the other children are working successfully on their own for the most part than it is to have to, again, pop up and constantly be attending to kids that might be off task, or maybe they're fighting or this or that, right? So take the time you and your students need now, which means taking 4-6 weeks to get those independent work procedures and routines in place. And we'll talk about how to do that momentarily. And only then, after those 4 to 6 weeks, could be even longer for some kindergarten classes, only then do you start to pull small groups because you're confident that kids know what they need to know in order to work independently. Now, 4 to 6 weeks or even more, that might seem like a lot, especially if you've tried to launch centers earlier in the year before. And I know it seems like a lot, but again, this is something where when you invest the time now, it pays off later. But I'm curious, different schools are different administrators are different. Do you feel pressure to rush into centers and getting kids working independently at the beginning of the year? Let me know yes or no in the comments if you feel pressure around this. I hope that you don't, because again, investing that time up front will pay off later so much. Tip number 2 is to very carefully and thoroughly break down all the little things that students will need to know and practice each one separately. So for us, we're like, oh, well, they just have to go do this activity, and then when it's time to rotate, they go here. And to us, it's pretty simple in our minds, but we have to think about little ones, especially if we're talking about kindergarten or first grade, that may not have done this before, right? Even if they have done it before, they don't know our expectations. They were with a different teacher last year, probably. And so we need to make a big list, and that could be including things like transitioning, right? That's something that we want to practice outside of everything else we're doing. Kids need to practice if they're going to be moving through different stations. How do they know when it's time to move? Is there a cleanup signal and then there's a transition signal? Something I like to do when I'm doing physical stations that kids can move between is after they're cleaned up, they put a finger on their lips and they point to where they're going next. I didn't make that up. I learned it from another teacher a long, long time ago. But this shows me that they know where they're supposed to go. So little things like that, right? Even if you do something like a must-do, may-do list, okay? How do the kids know when they're done and they can go choose a different activity? Just transitioning, right? That should be a couple of lessons in itself, and kids should practice just that. Then there's the actual activities that kids have to learn, right? Maybe you have a word building station that's going to stay pretty consistent throughout the school year. Well, they have to know, where do they find their words? How do they get the materials? How many times should they build their words? What should they do if they finish early? There's all these little things that we need to get really clear on ourselves and list out so that we can have kids practice just one thing at a time. Because to introduce, okay, you're doing this activity, now we're gonna rotate this way, and this is when you'll know when to clean up, like that's too much at once. So we have to slow ourselves down, make that big list, get really detailed, and then pull one thing out at a time to teach. So next, let's talk about what that teaching can look like. Tip number 3 is to teach any independent activity that you want kids to do, or really anything, even like transitioning, in the same way that you would teach a skill. We know that it's really effective to teach a skill by modeling it, meaning we're showing kids what to do and we're thinking aloud as we do it. I call it show and tell, right? I'm gonna show you what I'm doing and I'm gonna tell you what I'm doing and why. So we have to model. We're not asking them really to participate, we're just having them watch us. And after that comes guided practice. In guided practice, they could be helping you, and then you can be helping them do it, but there's guidance. It's not fully just like, okay, now you go do it on your own, right? It's kind of like that off ramp. And we do this with skills, but we also need to do this with activities and routines surrounding centers. So for example, if I'm thinking about that word building station that I mentioned earlier, I want to model like what it looks like to take materials out, to build the words, to read the words, right? If there's any partner interaction, I model that. And they're just watching me and listening. And then I'm gonna have them do it. Now, in some activities, you may have enough materials for the whole kids to practice, for the whole class rather, to practice at once. And so you can pass out materials and everybody does with your help, maybe with a partner's help, everybody does what you just showed them. But sometimes you might not have enough physical materials to do that, and that's no big deal. What I do in this case is I will model the activity and then I'll send a lot of the kids off to go work on something so basic, like a handwriting sheet. Because just because you haven't launched centers yet, it doesn't mean that kids can't do stuff independently, right? Like you can, even with kindergartners, they can be playing. And then while the other kids are doing something, you're pulling, it's not a traditional small group, it's just a couple of minutes where you have kids, a small group of kids practice like that word building station that you just modeled. So they're practicing with you and then you rotate out, they go back and do the handwriting sheet or whatever, another group comes. And I try to make those groups as big as possible, as much as I have materials for, just so it doesn't take too long, okay? So they're doing that guided practice with me. And if we're thinking about a word building station that kids are gonna be doing like over and over again throughout the school year, I'm gonna model and have them practice probably at least 2 times before I really say, okay, now you're gonna do it fully independently. Because we model, we give guided practice, and then the truly independent part is at that time that we are starting centers and we are, standing back or we're pulling a small group, and then the kids are doing it independently, okay? So what I do is, like I said, I list out all the different things I want them to know and be able to do, and I teach them with that modeling and guided practice. And like, let's say I have 45 minutes set aside for centers, like eventually in small group. Well, I'll still keep that 45 minutes at the beginning of the school year, and I use that block to teach maybe 2 different things. So we could be working on the word building station, and then, the second thing could be like learning how to use the listening center, okay? So I'm treating these as skills, right? Because they are skills. They may not be like how to add 2 numbers together, right? But it's still a skill that kids are building. So during this 4 to 6 weeks, they're building piece by piece the different skills that they will need to eventually work independently. Because like I said, there's just so many things that maybe we take for granted that kids need to be able to know how to do. So it's gonna take time. That's why I say the 4 to 6 weeks of building brick by brick, these different activities, these different skills, so that they can do it on their own and you can pull small groups. Tip number 4 is to keep activities very simple, especially at the beginning of the year. Now, throughout the year, whatever kids are practicing in centers, it should not be skills that are brand new. It should be things that they've practiced before. They've had that modeling, they've had that guided practice a couple of times before they're working on it independently. Because if you introduce stuff to centers that is really challenging for kids or they don't quite have it mastered yet, you are opening yourself up to behavior issues, right? Because they're stressed. Their brains are literally stressed if they don't know how to do something, and so they're gonna act out. They're gonna get off task. They're gonna ask for your attention, ask for your help, okay? So throughout the year, we always want center activities to be things that kids have already practiced with you multiple times. But especially at the beginning of the year, we want to keep things really simple because, again, to us, rotating through centers or doing the must do, may do, not a big deal. But to them, it's like cognitive overload. So we can reduce that cognitive load by giving simple activities. So here's just a couple of examples, okay? And these, by the way, I have some sets for kindergarten, first and second grade of simple no prep literacy centers that are perfect for the, first couple of weeks, first couple of months even, because there's a lot of them in there, first couple of months of school that you can use that are simple enough to where you don't have to prep stuff, because I know the beginning of the school year is crazy, and also easy for the kids to do, right? Not complicated. So here's an example. This is from the kindergarten set, Dragon Spin and Cover. Kids will use like a clear spinner overlay, or they can take like a pencil and spin a paper clip around the tip of the pencil. They spin the clear spinner overlays you can get on Amazon, and they're usually easier for kindergarten. But they spin a letter and then they cover it. And look how simple this is. You could have capital and lowercase matching, sure, but this is literally just looking at the letter and finding it and then covering it with a counter. So simple, right? Here's an example for first grade. This is a partner game. You could have more kids play, but generally I find that to reduce the amount of noise in the classroom, 2 kids playing a game together is better than like 3 or 4. So anyway, it's a very simple game. They just need game pieces and they move around the board, right? They read what they land on. And there's actually 2 words on each space. I'm not sure how easy it is for you to see, but they're minimal pairs, and reading minimal pairs, just a bonus tip, is something that has been shown to be really effective for teaching kids to decode. So like this says hot and not. They're only different by the first letter, H and N. This says bag and big. They're only different by the middle vowel, A and I, okay? So it's a really good practice activity, and most first graders, not all, but most first graders will have learned to read CVC words in kindergarten, and so this is a good review activity for them. Now, if I have first graders that can't read or it's really hard for them, I'm not gonna give them that activity. But the good news is that in those packs of back to school simple no prep literacy centers, I give you lots of different options, lots of different skills, so you can find something that's truly suited to your students. Now, moving up into second grade, they may, need something very simple like this, or they may be ready for a fun little bonus activity. So this is roll a story. So first they roll a die and they circle what character they roll, and then they roll a problem for their story. And then they can draw little pictures. They could write words. On separate paper, they can draw a story. If they're not up to writing, that's fine. You can have them write sentences, but they could even just tell the story orally to a partner. That's building the skills they need for writing. So again, it's simple, it's fun, it's doable, right? It doesn't take time. Like, you model it, of course, you give guided practice, of course, but then it's something that they can do on their own. And just keeping things simple makes things so much easier on you, and it helps them be successful at the beginning of the school year. My 5th tip is to use this time that you're teaching independent activities as an opportunity to build community and relationships. So it might sound kind of overwhelming where you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta list out all these things and teach all these things. And it can be a lot, right? But once you do it once and spend the time laying this out for future years, you can tweak it, of course. But once you do it once, it'll kind of lend itself to making it easier in the future. But anyway, so yes, there's a lot of procedures and routines, but there's so many opportunities to build relationships between kids, like those partner games that I mentioned, right? Teaching kids that this is part of teaching literacy centers or independent work, teaching them to take turns, teaching them to give their partner compliments. These can all be things that you are infusing into your instruction. Teaching kids how to navigate conflict, right? They can't decide who's gonna go first. How could they decide, right? You give them little tips like, oh, well, whoever is shorter gets to go first, or whatever, right? Whoever's wearing the color red, or something that's, pretty consistent that they can figure out on their own. So relationships between kids, but also relationships between you and your students. So as I'm seeing kids engage in guided practice, right? This is my opportunity to give compliments. I'm pointing out, oh my gosh, Bobby sat right down and got to work. Susie knew exactly where the materials were, right? She remembered that from what I showed you. Good job, Susie. So there's so many opportunities for you to compliment kids, which not only builds relationships with them, but it also helps you emphasize what you want kids to be doing. So many opportunities beyond just like the procedures and routines. As you're spending the 4 to 6 weeks, you're not just getting them ready for centers. You are getting them ready to be part of a classroom community, and you are building relationships with them too. My last tip is to be reflective and flexible, because you can have the best plan in the world. I've done this many times, and I start the year with a really good plan, and I realize that with this group of students, something's not going to work. Maybe I wanted to do stations, and it's just a class where there's a lot of behavior challenges, and so they need to do more independent stuff. They need to do a must-do, may-do list, because that's what's going to work best. Obviously, you need to give it some time and kind of see, like I said, it's going to take time for kids to master working independently. But, jot down notes. Even after you get to the point of doing small group, jot down notes about like what you notice happening during centers, or as you're reviewing their recording sheets, what do you notice? And always be flexible, be reflective, and be willing to make changes. There's a balance between needing to give it enough time for kids to master what they're supposed to be doing, but also to be noticing, hey, this isn't working. I need to do something different. Okay, so those are my 6 tips. And if you want, really simple, literally no prep, just print and go, literacy centers, activities, variety of skills for the first couple of months of school, you've got to check out this link that we're going to include in the caption to this video. This stuff is such a time saver. You have enough on your plate with trying to get this all ready, and that's only one chunk of the day. So those center activities, there's so many more that I didn't show you. They will just make your life so much easier and give your kids an opportunity to be successful with working independently. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and if you're rolling out centers, good luck. You got this. Thanks so much again for watching. Before you leave, make sure to hit the like button. Would love for you to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video.